Hello there. Welcome. I'm so glad you've decided to join me tonight. It feels like the world outside has finally quieted down, leaving just this small, warm space for us to share a story. And the story tonight is one you think you know. A story of deep sleep, of a castle lost to time, and of a fortress not of stone, but of thorns. It's the story of Sleeping Beauty. But more than that, it's the story of the very real, very patient plant that became her guardian. Before we begin our journey into that enchanted thicket, if you enjoy what we do here, this quiet exploration of the living world, I'd be so grateful if you'd consider leaving a like, or perhaps subscribing. It's just a gentle way of letting me know you are here, resting alongside us. And I'm always curious, where in the world are you listening from tonight? It's a lovely thought, all of us, scattered across the globe, settling in together under different stars. All right, now is the time. Let go of the day. Dim the lights if you haven't already. Find that perfect cool spot on your pillow and let your body grow heavy. Take a slow deep breath in and let it all go. We are about to step into a fairy tale, not to look at the princess or the prince, but to get intimately acquainted with the wall of roses that stood guard for 100 years. Let's begin. Chapter 1. The Mythical Fortress and its Botanical Muse. There is an image, etched into our collective memory by storybooks and lullabies. It is the final obstacle. A prince, having heard the legend of a sleeping princess, finally arrives at the kingdom that has been erased from all maps. But he does not find towering stone ramparts or a deep dark moat. He finds something far more daunting, a fortress that is alive. The story tells us that he faced a hedge, but this word hedge is a polite understatement. It is a wall, a rampart, a living tsunami of tangled branches so thick that the sun cannot pierce it. And this wall is armed. It is a solid mass of thorns, a dense, interlocking puzzle of vicious hooks and daggers. For 100 years it has grown, swallowing the castle whole, sealing it away from the world as perfectly as a tomb. Many princes had come before, the legend says, and they had been caught in this thorny embrace, held fast and consumed by the patient, unthinking defense of the briar. The air around it would be perfectly still, silent. The silence of a place where even the birds cannot find a perch, where small animals cannot find a path. The only sound would be the whisper of the wind against a million sharp points, and perhaps the creak of the old woody stems groaning under their own immense weight. The castle inside, with its sleeping court, is not just hidden, it is indigestible. The briar rose has made it so. This powerful, terrifying, and strangely beautiful image, where did it come from? It feels ancient, primal, as if it grew from the soil of folklore itself. And in a way it did. The story we know best as Sleeping Beauty is a polished gem, but it was mined from much rougher earth. The version that often first comes to mind is the one penned by the Brothers Grimm in the 19th century, which they called Dornröschen, literally Little Briar Rose. Their version is steeped in the dark, sylvan atmosphere of German folklore. Their thorny hedge feels like a wild elemental force, a piece of the Black Forest itself rising up to reclaim a human space. It is aggressive, hungry. It is nature as an untamable power. But even before the Grimms, the French author Charles Perrault wrote his own telling in the late 17th century, La Belle au Bois d'Armont, The Beauty in the Sleeping Wood. Perrault wrote for the sophisticated court of King Louis XIV, and his version is more elegant, more controlled. His thorny barrier is less a wild monster and more of a piece of enchanted architecture. It is described as a great wood, with trees and brambles intertwining so thickly that nothing could pass. It grew up in a quarter of an hour, a magical barricade to ensure the princess's slumber remained undisturbed. Perrault's hedge is a symbol of aristocratic seclusion, a magical keep-out sign for a royal estate. Whether it is the primal German forest or the enchanted French garden, the core element is the same. A plant, a common rose, has become an impenetrable fortress. And this is where the fairy tale ends, and our story, our quiet botanical investigation truly begins. Because the storytellers, for all their talk of curses and fairies, did not have to invent this plant. They simply had to observe the world outside their window with a storyteller's eye. The soul of the legend rests on the duality of its guardian, the rose and the thorn. They are inseparable, two sides of the same botanical coin. The rose flower itself is a universal symbol of beauty, of love, of perfection, and of a heartbreakingly brief lifespan. Its delicate, unfurling petals and intoxicating scent represent the princess at the heart of the castle, the prize, the reason for the quest. It is the promise of beauty that lies beyond the hardship. But the thorns are the curse. They are the challenge. They represent pain, defense, the difficulty of the journey. They are a physical manifestation of the words you may not enter. Each thorn is a silent guard, a miniature spear that asks a toll of blood from any who would try to pass. Together, the rose and its thorns create a perfect living metaphor, beauty that is fiercely protected, love that cannot be won without courage and sacrifice. It's a narrative masterpiece, and it was written not by Perrault or the Grimms, but by evolution. So what is this briar rose? The stories are beautifully vague, leaving the image to our imagination, but nature is specific. The term briar itself comes from Old English, referring to any thorny, prickly shrub, but when paired with rose, it points us toward a very real and fascinating group of wild roses native to Europe, the very lands where these stories first took root. There are two prime candidates for our botanical muse, two species that perfectly embody the spirit of Sleeping Beauty's fortress. Our first, and perhaps most famous suspect, is Rosa canina. You may know it by its common name, the dog rose. It's a name that feels almost disappointingly plain next to the romance of Briar Rose, but even this name holds a story. The great Roman naturalist, Pliny the Elder, wrote that the root of this plant was used to treat the bite of a rabid dog, hence canina, from the Latin for canine. Whether it worked or not is beside the point. The name stuck, a fossil of an ancient belief preserved in taxonomy. To understand how a dog rose could become a fortress, we have to look at how it grows. It is not a polite, upright garden rose. Rosa canina is an architect of chaos. It is a scrambling shrub, which means it doesn't have the rigid structure to stand tall on its own. Instead, it grows in long arching canes, some reaching 10 feet or more. These canes, called sarmenta, are like exploratory limbs. They weave their way up and through any neighboring plants, hawthorns, blackthorns, whatever is nearby, using them for support. It doesn't just grow next to other plants, it incorporates them into its structure. It is a master of entanglement. A single Rosa canina is a formidable thing, but when several grow together in a hedgerow or on the edge of a neglected field, they begin to collaborate. Their long arching canes interlace, weaving together into a structure of breathtaking complexity. New canes grow up through the latticework of the old, dead canes remain as a brittle, impassable skeleton, and other plants become unwilling partners in the construction. Over years, this becomes a thicket so dense and so tangled that it creates a solid, living wall. A person cannot simply push their way through. It is a living labyrinth, a puzzle with no solution. It is, in every practical sense, impenetrable, and of course it is armed. The defining feature of Rosa canina is its arsenal of thorns. Botanically speaking, they are not true thorns, which are modified stems, but prickles, which are outgrowths of the stem's outer layer. But to anyone who has been caught by one, the distinction feels rather academic. The prickles of the dog rose are masterpieces of defensive engineering. They are sharp, stout, and most importantly, they are hooked. They are falcate, meaning they are curved backwards like a small, sharp sickle or a raptor's talon. This shape is not an accident. It serves two brilliant purposes. First, it is the plant's climbing gear. As a cane grows up through another shrub, these hooks catch onto the bark and twigs, preventing the cane from sliding back down. It is nature's own grappling hook, allowing the rose to hoist itself up towards the sunlight. But their second purpose is purely defensive. When an animal or a prince tries to push past a branch, the forward motion causes the backward-facing hooks to dig in deeper. The more you struggle, the more firmly you are held. The plant does not need to be aggressive, it simply needs to hold on, and your own movement will do the rest. The thorns will snag on wool, tear at skin, and hold you fast. Now imagine this on a massive scale. 100 years of this growth, canes upon canes, a web of interlocking hooks, 10, 15, 20 feet high. It wouldn't just be a wall, it would be a trap. A silent, patient predator made of wood and thorns. The story of the failed princes getting caught in the hedge suddenly seems less like a fairy tale flourish and more like a brutally realistic observation. Yet for all this ferocity, in early summer, this monster clothes itself in the most delicate beauty. The flowers of Rosa canina are simple and perfect. 5 pale pink or white petals, opening wide to reveal a sunburst of golden stamens at the center. They are not the heavy, multi-petaled roses of a modern garden. They have a light, wild, simple grace, and they carry a faint, sweet scent, a whisper of perfume on the breeze. It is this combination, the brutal, impenetrable tangle of hooked thorns and the serene, gentle beauty of the blossoms that makes it the perfect briar rose. It is the curse and the princess, all in one plant. Our second candidate for the role of the mythical fortress is a close relative, Rosa rubiginosa, known more poetically as the sweet briar or the eglantine. Shakespeare was fond of the eglantine, mentioning it in A Midsummer Night's Dream. Like the dog rose, it is a thorny, thicket-forming European native. It also has vicious, hooked prickles and a rambling, scrambling habit of growth that can create impassable barriers over time. Its flowers are a deeper, more confident pink, but still possess that simple, 5-petaled wildness. But the sweet briar has a secret weapon, a characteristic that adds another layer of magic to our story. Its true enchantment is not in its flowers, but in its leaves. The undersides of the sweet briar's leaves are covered in tiny, sticky glands that, when bruised or warmed by the sun, or especially after a summer rain, release the most remarkable fragrance. It is not the heavy perfume of a rose blossom, but a crisp, clean, invigorating scent of green apples. Imagine it. Imagine our prince, finally arriving at the edge of the sleeping kingdom. Before he even sees the detail of the thorns, before he can comprehend the sheer scale of the thicket, he is met by this scent on the air, a fresh, living perfume, the smell of an apple orchard after a storm, emanating from a wall that appears dead and silent. It is a scent that speaks of life, of summer, of something vibrant and beautiful locked away inside. It would be an invitation and a warning all at once. The sweet briar doesn't just build a physical wall, it builds an atmospheric one, enchanting the air around it. Its defense is not just tactile, it is olfactory. Both of these plants, the dog rose and the sweet briar, perfectly fit the profile. They are native to the landscapes that gave birth to these tales. They possess the formidable, interlocking, and thorny growth habit required to build a fortress. And they both juxtapose this ferocity with moments of exquisite, delicate beauty. They are not magical beasts, they are real plants, following the simple, logical directives of their biology. Grow towards the light, protect yourself from being eaten, and make flowers to create the next generation. The genius of the storytellers was to see the epic narrative already present in these humble, common plants. They saw the slow, patient siege of a hedgerow reclaiming a pasture and imagined a castle being put to sleep for a century. They felt the sharp sting of a thorn and imagined it as the lingering power of a witch's curse. They were not just inventing a story, they were translating the language of the landscape. The Briar Fortress wasn't built in a quarter of an hour by a fairy's wand, as Perrault might have us believe. It was built over decades, one arching cane at a time, one interlocking branch, one patient, backward-facing thorn after another. It is a fortress built by the slow, relentless and quiet power of vegetation, a testament to the fact that, given enough time, nature can build walls more formidable than any made by human hands. And it is in this quiet botanical reality that the true deep magic of the story can be found. The magic of a simple wild rose patiently waiting in the hedgerows of Europe, ready to become a legend. Chapter 2. Chapter 2. The Architecture of Defense. Anatomy of a Briar Rose. And so we must step past the legend for a moment and meet the true architect of this fortress. To understand the deep magic of the story, we must first understand the quiet, unassuming, and utterly brilliant engineering of the plant itself. We must look at the wild rose not as a symbol, but as a living organism, a master of survival, and a builder of walls made from little more than sunlight, water, and time. Let us begin with the most obvious feature, the very thing that gives the briar its fearsome reputation: the sharp, curved projections that line its stems. In our common language, we call them thorns, and yet botany, in its gentle and precise way, asks us to look a little closer, for what we see on a rose is not, strictly speaking, a thorn at all. It is something different, something with its own unique origin story and its own particular genius. It is a prickle. This might seem like a small distinction, a matter of semantics, but in the world of plants, structure is purpose. A true thorn, like you would find on a hawthorn tree, is a modified stem. It grows from deep within the woody tissue, emerging from a bud that could have become a branch or a leaf. It is an integral part of the plant's internal skeleton, connected directly to its vascular system, its plumbing. To break off a hawthorn's thorn is to tear the very fabric of the branch. A spine, like those on a cactus, is something else entirely. It is a modified leaf, a testament to a life spent conserving water. Each sharp, needle-like spine was once, in its evolutionary past, a soft green leaf. It has sacrificed its ability to photosynthesize in exchange for becoming a point of hardened defense and a way to minimize water loss under a punishing sun. But the prickle of a rose, the prickle is different. It is an outlaw. It belongs to neither the world of stems nor the world of leaves. A prickle is an outgrowth of the epidermis, the very skin of the stem. It is more like a hardened, sharpened hair than a tiny branch. If we could shrink down and run our hand along a young green rose cane, we would feel that the prickles are not so much growing out of the stem as they are sitting on it. They are superficial, and because of this, with a little pressure, a mature prickle can be snapped clean off, leaving behind a small oval scar on the bark. It's this very quality that makes them so effective. They are disposable weaponry. Let us trace the life of a single prickle. It begins as a tiny, almost invisible bulge on a new pliable shoot. This young stem, or cane, is a vibrant green, soft and full of life, its surface busy with the work of photosynthesis. At this stage, the future prickle is just a collection of epidermal cells, along with the cells of the cortex just beneath, that have been genetically instructed to multiply in a very specific way. They are like a tiny team of masons given a unique blueprint. They divide and expand, not outward into a leaf, nor upward into a stem, but into a sharp conical point. As the cane grows, so does the prickle. The cells on its surface produce a waxy coating called a cuticle, the same waterproof layer that protects the leaves and stem, making it slick and resistant to moisture. Inside, a remarkable transformation is taking place. The living pliable cells, full of cytoplasm and water, begin a process of programmed death. They commit a form of cellular suicide, known as apoptosis, in service of the greater whole. As they die, their cell walls, which are made primarily of cellulose, become infused with a tough, rigid polymer called lignin. Lignin is nature's concrete. It is what gives wood its strength, its resistance to compression and decay. The prickle, once soft and green, becomes a hollow cone of lignified, dead cells. It is now a piece of biological hardware. It is lightweight, yet incredibly strong and sharp, tapering to a point that can be just a few cells wide. And most ingeniously of all, on most wild climbing roses, the prickles do not point straight out. They curve backward, ever so slightly, toward the base of the plant. They are hooks, grappling hooks. This shape serves a dual purpose. For a climbing rose, scrambling its way up through a thicket or over a wall to find the light, these hooks are its climbing gear. They catch on the bark of neighboring trees, on other stems, on any purchase they can find, allowing the long, flexible canes to anchor themselves as they push ever upward. The rose does not climb with the grasping tendrils of a grapevine or the adhesive pads of ivy. It climbs with an army of tiny, persistent hooks, a slow, patient ascent powered by friction and tenacity. But this backward curve is also the secret to its defensive genius. When a large herbivore, a deer perhaps, pushes its way into a rose thicket to browse on the leaves, the forward motion is relatively easy. The prickles may scrape, but they glide over the animal's hide. The trouble begins when the animal tries to pull back, to retreat. Now those hundreds of tiny curved hooks do their work. They dig in, they catch on fur and skin, not with a clean puncture but with a tearing, ripping motion. The more the animal struggles, the deeper they bite. The message is clear and taught through pain. This is not a place to linger. This is not an easy meal. The fortress punishes retreat. And so, this simple structure, this epidermal outgrowth, becomes a masterpiece of multi-purpose design. It is climbing gear. It is armor. It is a weapon that is cheap for the plant to produce and easy to replace. It is the first and most visible layer of the briar's architecture of defense. Now, let's pull our focus back from the microscopic detail of a single prickle and look at the structure it sits upon. The cane. The long, arching stems are the walls and towers of our botanical fortress. A rose plant is not a tree with a single thick trunk. It is a shrub, a community of stems, each with its own life cycle, all rising from a central woody base known as the crown. A new cane, in its first year, is called a primer cane. It is often a vibrant green, its surface is smooth between the prickles, and its structure is flexible, pliable. It is in a phase of pure, ambitious growth, racing upward toward the sunlight. If we were to slice through this young cane and look at it under a microscope, we would see a marvel of biological plumbing. In the very center, there might be a soft, spongy tissue called the pith. Arranged in a neat ring around it are the vascular bundles, the plant's circulatory system. Each bundle contains two types of specialized tissue. There is the xylem, a network of microscopic hollow tubes, like bundles of tiny drinking straws, whose job is to transport water and dissolved minerals up from the roots to the leaves. The walls of the xylem tubes are themselves reinforced with lignin, giving the young stem much of its structural support. Then there is the phloem, another set of tubes designed to carry the sugars and other nutrients produced during photosynthesis in the leaves down to the parts of the plant that need energy, like the growing tips, the flowers, and the roots. It is the plant's food delivery service. Between the xylem and the phloem lies a layer of cells so thin it is almost invisible, yet it holds the secret to the cane's future. This is the vascular cambium. It is a layer of perpetual growth, of undecided cells called meristematic tissue. These cells are like stem cells in an animal. They have the potential to become other things, and as the season progresses they will. The cambium divides, producing new xylem cells to the inside and new phloem cells to the outside. This is how the cane grows thicker, stronger. As the first year ends and the cane enters its second season, it is now called a floricane. It is on these second-year canes that most wild roses will produce their flowers. But another, slower transformation is also underway. The green, smooth skin, the epidermis, begins to be replaced. A new layer of protective tissue, the periderm, develops from a different layer of cambium, the cork cambium. This is the beginning of bark. The cane loses its bright green color, turning a darker reddish-brown or grey. It becomes woody. The process of lignification, which we saw in the prickle, now happens on a massive scale throughout the cane structure. The flexible shoot becomes a rigid, durable rod of wood. This process continues, year after year. The cane gets thicker, its bark more rugged. After a few years, perhaps 3 to 5, an individual cane will have fulfilled its purpose. Its vigor will decline. It will produce fewer flowers and leaves, and the plant will begin to divert its resources elsewhere. The old cane may die back, but from the crown at its base, new primocanes are already rising to take its place. This continuous cycle of growth and replacement is the key to the briar patch's impenetrable nature. It is not a static wall, but a constantly regenerating one. Old canes die and become part of the tangled structure, their hardened, prickly skeletons forming a lattice upon which the new, vigorous canes can climb. The rose is constantly rebuilding itself, reinforcing its own defenses from within. And it has another clever strategy. The canes of many wild roses are not content to simply grow upwards. They arch. They grow long, sometimes many meters in a single season, and then the weight of their own growth pulls them down in a graceful, sweeping arc until the tip touches the ground. Where the tip of the cane makes contact with the soil, a new magic happens. Stimulated by contact with the damp earth, the cells at the tip can differentiate and begin to form roots. A new independent root system develops, and from that point, a new shoot can rise. This process is called layering. The mother plant has effectively sent out a scout, which has now established a new outpost. Through this simple, patient process of arching and layering, a single rose plant can, over decades, colonize a huge area. It doesn't spread through underground runners like a raspberry, but through these ambitious, overarching bridges of living wood. Each new outpost becomes a new center of growth, sending out its own arching canes. This is how a single briar becomes a thicket. It is a slow, methodical conquest of territory. It is an act of architecture, with the plant itself serving as both the builder and the building material. The interlocking, crisscrossing canes, each one studded with those backward-facing prickles, create a three-dimensional maze that is all but impassable. It is a structure without a blueprint, an emergent property of a simple set of growth rules: grow toward the light, arch under your own weight, root where you land, and defend yourself at every point. But the fortress we see above ground is only half of the story. For every arching cane reaching for the sun, there is a hidden, silent architecture at work beneath the soil. The root system. The roots of a rose are its anchor, its foundation, and its tireless mining operation. Let us imagine we could sink down into the cool, dark earth beneath a mature briar patch. We would find a world as complex and intricate as the thorny tangle above. Most roses begin with a taproot, a single thick primary root that grows straight down, plunging deep into the soil to find stable moisture, anchoring the young plant against wind and disturbance. This is the central pillar of the subterranean structure. From this taproot, and from the base of the plant's crown, a vast and sprawling network of fibrous roots extends outwards. These are much finer, more delicate structures, and their job is exploration. They weave their way through the topsoil, the zone richest in nutrients and oxygen. Their growth is not random. The root tips are exquisitely sensitive. They can detect gradients of moisture, of nitrates, of phosphates, and they will actively grow toward these resources. They can sense obstacles, a large stone or the root of a rival plant, and navigate around them. The real work of absorption happens at an even finer scale. The last few centimeters of each of these thousands of root tips are covered in a downy white fuzz. These are the root hairs. Each hair is a single elongated epidermal cell, a microscopic probe extending out into the soil. Their sheer number is staggering. A mature rose plant can have billions of them, and if you were to lay them end to end, they would stretch for kilometers. Their purpose is to create an immense surface area, a vast interface between the plant and the soil. It is through this massive surface area that the plant draws in almost all of its water and mineral nutrients. But the rose is not alone down here in the dark. It is part of a community, a partnership. The roots of the rose, like the roots of most plants on Earth, are engaged in an ancient and mutually beneficial relationship with a group of organisms we rarely see, mycorrhizal fungi. These fungi are not a disease, they are an ally. Their bodies are made of incredibly fine threads called hyphae, which are far thinner than even the finest root hair. This network of hyphae, called a mycelium, extends far out into the soil, exploring microscopic pores that the plant's roots could never reach. The mycelial network is a far more efficient miner than the rose root system alone. It is particularly good at extracting phosphorus, a vital nutrient that is often locked up in the soil in a form that plants cannot easily absorb. The fungus absorbs these nutrients and transports them back to the rose's roots. The hyphae physically connect with, and in some cases even penetrate, the cells of the root. Here, an exchange takes place. The fungus trades its hard-won minerals for the sugars that the rose has created through photosynthesis and transported down to its roots. It is a beautiful, silent symbiosis. The fungus extends the reach of the root system 100-fold, and the plant provides the fungus with the energy it needs to live. This subterranean network connects not only the fungus and the rose, but can also connect the rose to other plants in the vicinity, creating a quiet, underground economy where resources can be passed between neighbors. This robust root system is also a formidable competitor. It allows the rose to aggressively claim its territory below ground, drawing up water and nutrients before other, more shallow-rooted plants can get to them. The roots anchor the fortress, feed the fortress, and ensure that the ground upon which the fortress stands belongs to the rose alone. It is the unseen foundation that makes the visible defiance possible. Yet, the briar's defenses are not purely physical. The plant is also a master of chemical warfare, a silent and sophisticated form of defense that complements its physical armor. While the prickles deter the large browsers, the leaves and young stems must be protected from a different set of threats, a vast army of smaller herbivores, from caterpillars to beetles, and a host of microscopic pathogens like fungi and bacteria. If we were to pluck a leaf from a wild rose and chew it, something I don't recommend, we would find it unpleasantly bitter and astringent. That astringency, that dry, puckering sensation in the mouth, is the taste of the plant's chemical shield. It is caused by a class of compounds called tannins. Tannins are produced by the plant and stored in its cells, particularly in the leaves and the bark of young stems. They are a deterrent. When an insect begins to chew on a leaf, the cells are broken open and the tannins are released. These molecules have a particular talent. They bind to proteins and cause them to precipitate, to clump together. When the insect ingests these tannins, they bind to the proteins in its saliva and its digestive enzymes, making them ineffective. The insect may be eating, but it cannot properly digest the leaf tissue. It cannot extract the nutrition it needs. The leaf becomes, in essence, an empty meal. This is a powerful disincentive to feast. For many insects, a plant rich in tannins is a landscape of starvation. Beyond tannins, the rose produces a whole cocktail of other defensive chemicals, phenolic compounds, for instance, which are responsible for many of the pigments and scents of a plant, can also have antimicrobial and antifungal properties. They can disrupt the growth of fungal spores that land on the leaf's surface or inhibit bacteria that might try to invade through a small wound. The very fragrance of a rose, the thing we find so beautiful, is part of this complex chemical language, a language that can attract pollinators but also repel pests. This chemical shield is not static, it is dynamic and responsive. When a leaf is damaged by a chewing insect, the plant can sometimes recognize the specific chemical signature of the insect's saliva. This can trigger a cascade of internal signals. The plant may begin to ramp up its production of tannins and other defensive compounds, not just in the damaged leaf, but throughout the entire plant. It sends out an alert, hardening its defenses system-wide in response to an attack. It is a slow, silent, but incredibly sophisticated immune response. So the fortress is protected on multiple levels. The prickles are the outer walls, the mechanical defense against the large invaders. The tannins and phenolics are the chemical shield, the internal security system that protects against the smaller, more insidious threats. Every part of the plant, from the tip of its sharpest prickle to the complex biochemistry within each leaf, is engaged in the constant, quiet work of survival and defense. And all of this entire complex, multi-layered fortress, is built from the simplest of beginnings. It is built from a single seed. Let us finish our tour of this architecture by considering the life cycle that makes it all possible. The story begins in the autumn, inside a fleshy, brightly colored fruit called a hip. The rose hip itself is another clever piece of design. Its red or orange color is a signal to birds and small mammals. It says, "Here is a nutritious meal." When a bird, like a blackbird or a thrush, eats the hip, it digests the sweet, vitamin-rich pulp, but the small, hard seeds within pass through its digestive tract unharmed. The bird then flies away, and hours later deposits the seeds in a new location, complete with a small parcel of fertilizer. It is a brilliant dispersal strategy, allowing the rose to send its children far and wide. The seed that lands in a suitable spot may not germinate right away. Many rose seeds require a period of cold, damp stratification. They need to experience the chill of winter. This is a safety mechanism, ensuring that the seed doesn't sprout during a warm spell in autumn, only to be killed by the first hard frost. It waits for the signal of a prolonged cold, followed by the warmth of spring. When the conditions are right, the seed coat breaks and life stirs. A tiny root, the radical, emerges first, anchoring the seedling and beginning its search for water. Then, a shoot, the hypocotyl, pushes its way upward, carrying the first two leaves, the cotyledons, toward the light. This tiny, vulnerable seedling is now in a race for its life. It must establish itself quickly, growing its root system and producing its first true leaves to begin photosynthesizing before its initial energy reserves run out. In its first year, the young rose is focused on establishment. It puts its energy into building a strong root system and a small rosette of leaves. It will likely not grow a tall cane or produce any flowers. It is playing the long game, building its foundation. In its second or third year, if it has been successful, it will send up its first true primer cane. This is the beginning of the fortress. The cane will grow with astonishing speed during the long days of early summer, pushing its way up through the surrounding vegetation. It is during this phase that the architecture of the briar patch truly begins to take shape. Year after year, the process repeats. The crown at the base of the plant grows thicker and woodier. More canes are produced each spring. The arching and layering strategy begins, expanding the plant's footprint. The root system delves deeper and spreads wider, locking up the resources of the soil. The dead canes from previous years accumulate, adding to the structural complexity of the thicket. A single wild rose plant can live for decades, some for over 100 years. Over this vast expanse of time, through this slow, patient, and relentless process of growth, defense, and regeneration, it can build a thicket that is 10 meters across or more. It becomes not just a plant, but a habitat, a refuge for small birds who can nest deep within its protected confines, safe from predators, a larder for the insects that have co-evolved to tolerate its chemical defenses, a feature of the landscape. To look at such a thicket is to see the result of 1,000,000 quiet decisions made by a living organism. The angle of a prickle, the curve of a cane, the depth of a root, the concentration of a chemical. Each detail is a response to the challenges of its world. Each element is a word in the long, slow story of survival. This is the real briar rose, not a passive backdrop for a fairy tale, but a dynamic, formidable, and deeply intelligent architect, building its own kingdom, one arching, interlocking, and perfectly defended branch at a time. The fortress is not an instantaneous act of magic, it is the patient masterpiece of botany. Chapter 3. The Tangled Kingdom. The briar patch as an ecosystem. And this masterpiece of botany, this fortress, is never empty. A fortress is not built to stand vacant. Its very purpose implies something precious to protect, a life to be lived within its walls. And so, as the briar rose matures, as its first tentative canes multiply into an impenetrable dome of interlocking thorns and leaves, it ceases to be just a plant. It undergoes a quiet, almost imperceptible transformation. It becomes a place, a destination. It becomes a neighborhood, a bustling city, a tangled kingdom with its own laws, its own seasons, and its own vibrant, teeming populace. The architect, having built its magnificent structure, now becomes the landlord, the provider, and the silent, patient guardian of 1,000 smaller lives. To step into the world of the Briar Patch is to witness an entire ecosystem, a web of dependencies so intricate and so finely tuned that it feels less like a product of chance and more like a deliberate, living tapestry. The air itself changes as you draw near. On a warm day, it is thick with the sweet, almost spicy fragrance of the blossoms, a perfume that is not a static scent but a broadcast, a complex chemical message sent out on the breeze, an invitation to a world of nectar. The sound changes too. The wider sounds of the field or woodland edge become muted, replaced by a low, constant hum, the collective thrum of 1,000,000 tiny wings, the sound of life's essential business being carried out. This kingdom does not have a single grand entrance. Instead, it has countless secret doorways, passages known only to its inhabitants. For the smallest of creatures, the gaps between the leaves are grand boulevards. For a field mouse, the cool, dark tunnels at the base of the canes are ancient, familiar highways, scented with the musk of generations. For a nesting wren, a particular V-shaped junction of two thorny branches is the perfect foundation, the one secure place in a dangerous world to build a home. The briar offers a conditional welcome to those who know its ways, who are small enough to navigate its corridors and tough enough to respect its defenses. It offers sanctuary to the large, the clumsy, the predatory. It presents only a wall of daggers. It is a selective haven, a living filter that chooses its residents with profound, unconscious wisdom. Let us begin our exploration in the spring, for it is in spring that the Tangled Kingdom truly throws open its gates and announces its renewal. After the stark, skeletal silence of winter, the first signs of life are subtle. A warmth returns to the soil, and deep within the briar's root system, a slow, ancient chemistry awakens. Water, drawn from the damp earth, begins its long journey up through the vascular tissues of the canes, a silent internal river flowing upwards towards the light. The canes themselves, which may have looked brittle and lifeless, begin to show a flush of deep red and vibrant green. The tiny dormant buds, each a perfectly packaged promise of a leaf, begin to swell. They are wrapped in tough outer scales, little armored cases that protected them from the winter's frost, but now pushed from within by the irresistible pressure of new growth, these scales peel back, and then the leaves emerge. They do not appear fully formed. They are at first tightly coiled, wrinkled, and a delicate, almost translucent shade of bronze or red, full of anthocyanin pigments that act as a natural sunscreen, protecting the tender new cells from the strengthening sun. As they unfurl, like a clenched fist slowly opening, they reveal their complex compound structure, a central stem with typically 5 to 7 serrated leaflets. They are a soft, velvety green, and as the canopy of the thicket fills in, it creates a new world of shifting light and shadow on the ground below. The air beneath the leaves becomes cooler, more humid. The entire thicket takes a deep collective breath and begins the great work of photosynthesis, transforming sunlight into the sugar that will power the entire community for the year to come. But the leaves are only the prelude. The true coronation of spring arrives with the blossoms. It begins again with a swelling. The flower buds, green and tightly sealed by their 5-pointed sipples, look like small green flasks, each holding a secret. Then, one warm morning, perhaps after a night of gentle rain, the sipples begin to peel back, and a sliver of pale pink or pure white is revealed. Over the course of a day, the flower opens. The petals, so fragile you feel they might dissolve at a touch, unfurl from their intricate spiral. They are often heart-shaped, with a delicate crepe paper texture, and they form a simple open-faced cup, a shape that is the floral equivalent of an open-armed welcome. This is not a complex tubular flower that reserves its nectar for a specialist with a long tongue. The briar rose is a generalist. It offers its treasure to all who can reach it. And at the center of this pale cup is a sunburst of brilliant gold, a dense ring of over 100 stamens, each a slender filament topped with an anther heavy with pollen. In the very middle of this golden ring sits the stigma, the receptive tip of the female part of the flower, waiting. The scent intensifies, a rich layered perfume that is both sweet and slightly fruity, a beacon for miles around. And now, the first citizens of this kingdom, the couriers and messengers, begin to arrive. The sound of the thicket deepens into a vibrant hum. The first to arrive are often the queen bumblebees, large, drowsy, and clad in velvet. Having survived the winter alone and underground, she is desperate for nectar to fuel her search for a nest site and to begin laying the first eggs of her new colony. She is not a delicate visitor. She lands on a blossom with a satisfying thud, the whole flower head bobbing under her weight. She is clumsy, but incredibly effective. She scrambles over the golden stamens, her thick furry coat becoming completely dusted in yellow pollen. As she moves from flower to flower, she is a living brush, transferring the vital genetic dust from the anther of one blossom to the sticky stigma of another. She drinks deeply of the nectar, a pure sugar energy that fuels her frantic vital work. We can see different kinds of bumblebees answering the call. The buff-tailed bumblebee, with its distinctive straw-colored bands, and as its name suggests, its buff-white tail. Or the red-tailed bumblebee, a striking vision of jet-black velvet with a fiery orange-red tip. Each moves with a similar industriousness, a focused energy that seems to block out the rest of the world. For them, this blossoming briar is not just a pretty sight, it is a life-saving oasis in the landscape, a crucial first stop in the long process of building a colony. Soon after, the honeybees arrive, perhaps from a hive in a hollow tree or a beekeeper's apiary half a mile away. They are smaller, more slender, more organized. They operate with a different kind of precision. A honeybee scout will have found this bounty and returned to the hive, performing her famous waggle dance, a marvel of abstract communication, describing the precise direction and distance to this glorious blooming briar patch. And now her sisters have arrived in force. A honeybee does not simply blunder through the pollen like a bumblebee. She is more methodical. Watch her closely. You will see her land and systematically work her way around the ring of stamens. She uses her forelegs to comb the pollen from the anthers and pass it back to her middle legs, which then transfer it to the specialized pollen baskets, the corbiculae, on her hind legs. These are not simple patches of hair. They are concave, polished sections of her tibia, fringed with long, stiff hairs, a perfectly designed piece of biological equipment. The pollen is mixed with a little nectar to make it sticky, and you can see the growing bright yellow ball of it on each of her hind legs, a precious cargo of protein to be taken back to feed the developing larvae in the hive. And all the while, as she gathers this pollen, her body, covered in fine branched hairs, is unintentionally but perfectly carrying out the rose's own desire, dusting other flowers with the pollen that clings to her. But the bees are not the only ones. Look closer at the open face of a flower. You might see a creature that at first glance looks like a tiny wasp-like bee. It hovers, motionless, in mid-air. Its wings a transparent blur before darting with impossible speed to a new flower. This is a hoverfly. They are masters of disguise. Their black and yellow markings a clever piece of mimicry designed to fool predators into thinking they have a sting they do not possess. They are more delicate feeders than the bees. They land gently on the petals and use their short, sponge-like mouthparts to lap up nectar and consume individual grains of pollen. While they don't carry the same huge loads as bees, they are numerous and persistent, flitting from flower to flower, and they play a vital role, especially in cooler weather when bees are less active. They are the secondary, quieter team of pollinators, ensuring the work gets done. And their contribution to the briar patch doesn't end there. The female hoverfly will seek out a leaf infested with aphids, the tiny sap-sucking insects, and lay her eggs there. When the hoverfly larvae hatch, they are voracious predators of aphids, making the hoverfly not just a pollinator, but also a tiny security guard for the plant. And there are others still. Butterflies, like the peacock or the red admiral, may drift by, uncoiling their long straw-like proboscis to probe for nectar. Day-flying moths, too. The sheer generosity of the briar's simple, open flower means that anyone with the ability to reach it can partake in the feast, and in doing so serve the plant. The briar patch in full bloom is a public square, a bustling marketplace where the currency is nectar and pollen, and the business being transacted is the future of both the plant and the insects. It is a symphony of coevolution, a dance perfected over millions of years. While this vibrant aerial commerce is taking place, a more hidden, more domestic drama is unfolding deep within the thorny embrace of the thicket. For the briar's true gift to many creatures is not food but safety. It is a living shield, a fortress of such perfect design that it has become the preferred nesting site for a whole host of small birds. Listen carefully. Past the hum of the bees, you may hear a sudden explosive burst of song, a cascade of notes so powerful and complex it seems impossible that it could come from a tiny brown bird. This is the song of the male wren. He is a feathered ball of energy, weighing little more than a coin, with a short cocked tail and a surprisingly fierce spirit. For the wren, the briar patch is the perfect territory. He can creep and crawl through the tangled interior like a mouse, his slender body and strong legs perfectly adapted to navigating the thorny labyrinth in search of spiders and insects. And the thicket's dense structure offers him not just one, but multiple potential nest sites. The male wren is an obsessive architect. He will build several nests within his territory, not just one. A wren's nest is a beautiful, intricate dome of moss, leaves and grass, with a small, round entrance hole on the side. He tucks them into the most secure-looking crevices, a dense fork in a branch, a hollow where several canes cross over. He builds these cock's nests as part of his courtship display. When a female arrives, he will proudly show her his creations, and she will choose the one she likes best. She then takes over, lining her chosen nest with a thick, soft layer of feathers, creating a warm, safe chamber for her eggs. Inside the briar, her nest is almost invisible. It is camouflaged perfectly, looking like just another clump of natural debris caught in the branches, and it is defended. A predator like a magpie, a crow, or even a domestic cat simply cannot push its way through the interlocking thorny canes to reach the nest. The parent wrens can slip in and out through tiny secret gaps, but the larger threat is held at bay. The briar's defense becomes the wren's defense. The plant's architecture becomes the bird's nursery. Here, in this thorny cradle, she will lay her 5 to 8 tiny speckled eggs, and the chorus of the wren's song that pours from the top of the thicket is a declaration of ownership, a testament to the security he feels within its walls. Living a quieter life in the same tangled neighborhood is the dunnock, or hedge sparrow. It is a bird easily overlooked, often mistaken for a common sparrow, with its subtle, streaky brown and grey plumage. But the dunnock is a creature of the shadows, a specialist of the undergrowth. Its whole life is lived at a low level, shuffling and creeping along the ground at the base of the briar patch, flicking over dead leaves with its fine beak in search of insects and seeds. Its song is a gentle, high-pitched and rather hurried warble, nothing like the wren's confident explosion. It is a song delivered from within the safety of the leaves, not proclaimed from the highest point. The dunnock's nest is also built deep within the briar, but it is a different construction from the wren's. It is a neat, open cup, woven from twigs and moss, and lined with hair and wool, and inside the female will lay 4 or 5 eggs of the most breathtaking luminous blue. The color is so pure and so vivid, it seems almost impossible, a flash of tropical sea, hidden in the muted browns and greens of the undergrowth. For the dunnock, the briar is everything. It is its larder, its hiding place, and the only place it feels safe enough to build its home and raise its young. The dunnock's life story is one of quiet discretion, and the dense thorny briar provides the perfect stage for its unobtrusive existence. And then there is the robin. Unlike the dunnock, the robin is bold and conspicuous, with its bright red breast, a fiercely defended badge of territory. A robin will often use the topmost spray of a briar cane as a songpost, a prominent stage from which to broadcast its beautiful liquid and slightly melancholy song, warning off all rivals. But when it comes to nesting, it too retreats into the secrecy of the thicket. Robins favor a well-hidden cavity and the base of a mature briar patch, where the canes are thick and tangled with ivy and other climbers, provides the perfect location. The nest, a cup of moss and dead leaves lined with hair, will be tucked away so deeply that it is practically invisible. From this secure base, the parent robins will launch their forays, fiercely defending their patch of the kingdom, their bright chests flashing as they see off intruders. The briar is both their watchtower and their keep. As spring deepens into high summer, the character of the briar kingdom changes. The frantic, hopeful energy of blooming and nesting gives way to a drowsy, sun-drenched hum of productivity. The flowers have faded, their petals falling like confetti to the floor of the thicket. In their place, the tiny green bases of the flowers, the receptacles, begin to swell. The great work of pollination has been successful, and the plant now shifts its energy from advertisement to production, to the slow, patient creation of its fruit and seeds. The canopy is now at its thickest. The leaves are a deep, robust green, no longer tender but tough and leathery, hard at work photosynthesizing in the long summer daylight. This dense roof of leaves creates a unique microclimate in the interior of the patch. It is a world of deep, green-tinged shade. It is cooler here, and significantly more humid, as the moisture transpired from the thousands of leaves is trapped within the tangled structure. This shade and moisture make the base of the briar an ideal habitat for a whole new community of creatures. Mosses carpet the older canes near the ground. Fungi emerge from the damp leaf litter, and the cool, dark runways at the base of the stems are the domain of small mammals. Here the woodmouse and the bank vole make their homes. They are creatures of the edge, living a life of constant vigilance, always at risk from owls, kestrels and weasels. But the briar patch is their sanctuary. It is their citadel. Within the impenetrable tangle, they are safe from aerial attack. The dense network of thorny stems makes it almost impossible for a fox or a badger to dig them out. They create intricate networks of tunnels and pathways through the undergrowth, known only to them. You can sometimes see the faint trace of these runs, little channels in the grass, leading to the safety of the briar. They feed on the seeds of grasses at the briar's edge, on fallen insects, and later in the year they will feast on the bounty the briar itself provides. The briar patch is their larder, their nursery, and their panic room, all rolled into one. For these small, twitching, nervous creatures, the briar's thorns are not a threat, but a promise of safety. Sometimes a larger resident takes up lodging. The hedgehog, a creature of the dusk, needs a safe place to sleep during the day, a place protected from disturbance. The dry, sheltered and well-defended space at the heart of a large briar thicket is a 5-star hedgehog hotel. It will build a nest, a hibernaculum, of dry leaves and grass, and curl up for the day, its own prickly defences perfectly complemented by the briar's thorny shield. But the leaves of the briar are also a food source, and this attracts a different class of resident. This is where we see the more complex, sometimes ruthless, economics of the ecosystem at play. On the undersides of the tender new shoots, you may find dense colonies of aphids. They are tiny, pear-shaped insects, living seemingly placid lives, but they are highly efficient feeding machines. Each aphid has a specialized, needle-like mouthpart called a stylet, which it inserts directly into the phloem of the plant, the vascular tissue that transports the sugary sap created during photosynthesis. They are in essence tapping directly into the plant's bloodstream, drinking its life-giving energy. They consume so much of this sugar-rich sap that they have to excrete the excess, a sticky, sweet substance called honeydew. This honeydew rains down onto the leaves below, making them glossy and sticky to the touch. This might seem like a simple act of waste, but in the briar's economy, nothing is wasted. This honeydew is a valuable food source for other insects. Ants, In particular, will farm the aphids. They will tend to the aphid colonies, stroking them with their antennae to encourage them to excrete the honeydew, which the ants then drink. In return for this sweet food, the ants will act as bodyguards, fiercely defending the aphids from predators. You can see them marching up and down the stems, a tiny army protecting its livestock. But there are predators that can get past the ants. The most welcome of these, from the briar's perspective, is the ladybug and its larva. The adult ladybug, a cheerful-looking beetle, is a formidable aphid hunter, but its larva is a true monster of this microscopic world. It looks like a tiny six-legged alligator, black and orange and spiky, and it is ravenously hungry. A single ladybug larva can consume hundreds of aphids before it pupates. We also see the larva of the lacewing, another ferocious predator, and the hoverfly larva we mentioned earlier. The briar stem becomes a microscopic savanna, with vast herds of aphid grazers, tended by ant shepherds, and hunted by ladybug and lacewing lions. It is a complex drama of life and death, played out on a stage just millimeters wide. Spiders, too, find the briar to be a perfect hunting ground. The complex, three-dimensional structure of the branches is an ideal scaffolding for their webs. The classic, beautiful orb webs are spun in the gaps between the canes, positioned perfectly to catch the bees, flies, and moths that are drawn to the plant. The spider sits, patient, often in a curled leaf retreat at the edge of her web, feeling for the slightest vibration that signals a catch. Other, more cryptic spiders hunt here too. The crab spider, often colored to perfectly match the white or pink of the rose blossom, will sit motionless among the stamens, its front legs held open like a trap. It is a master of ambush. A pollinating insect, expecting a meal of nectar, will land on the flower, only to be seized in a fatal embrace. The briar is both a restaurant and a trap, depending on your perspective. As summer's heat begins to wane and the days shorten, the season of autumn arrives, and the briar kingdom's purpose shifts once more. The energy it has been gathering all summer from the sun is now directed into its final, most important task, ensuring the next generation. The small
thicket,
green,
which was a
swollen
flush of
bases
pale
of the old
pink in the
flowers
spring,
have been slowly
is now
studded with hundreds of points of fiery red breaks down. A stunning display
true
against the
colours are
backdrop of
revealed.
the now
They
fading
become a
green
brilliant,
leaves.
glossy
Each
scarlet.
hip is a marvel
These
of
are the
biological
rose hips,
packaging.
the glorious
It is not a
jewel-like
true
fruit of the
in the
briar.
botanical sense, like a berry. It is what is known as a pomme, or an accessory fruit. The fleshy, edible part is the swollen receptacle of the flower, the hypanthium. Inside this fleshy casing are the true fruits, the seeds, which are technically called achenes, and surrounding these seeds is a layer of fine, stiff hairs. Anyone who has ever made itching powder from rose hips knows these hairs well. They are a deterrent, a form of internal defense designed to discourage animals from crushing the precious seeds when they eat the fruit. These hips are a vital resource. They are phenomenally rich in vitamin C, many times more so than an orange, as well as vitamins A and E, and antioxidants. They are in effect tiny, power-packed nutritional grenades, and as other food sources in the landscape begin to dwindle, the briar patch becomes the community larder, a beacon for hungry creatures. This is the season of the dispersers. The plant has packaged its seeds in this delicious, nutritious and brightly colored casing for one reason: to entice an animal to eat it, carry it away, and deposit the seeds somewhere new. This is a crucial partnership. The briar, being rooted to the spot, needs a mobile partner to spread its offspring. Large, fruit-eating birds are the primary couriers. Blackbirds and song thrushes, birds of the thrush family, are particularly fond of rose hips. They will arrive in chattering flocks, their sharp eyes having spotted the blaze of red from a distance. A blackbird will pluck a hip from the branch, and unlike a finch which would crush the seed to get at the kernel, it will swallow the hip whole or in large chunks. The fleshy part is digested in the bird's gut, providing it with vital energy and nutrients. But the hard, tough-coated seeds and their irritating hairs pass straight through the digestive system, unharmed. This journey through the bird's gut is not just a free ride, it is an essential part of the process. The digestive acids and enzymes work to break down the tough outer coating of the seeds, a process called scarification. Without this, the seeds would be much less likely to germinate. Then, hours later, and perhaps miles away, the bird will excrete the seeds, packaged in their own small pile of fertilizer. The seeds have been transported far from the parent plant, reducing competition, and have been perfectly prepared for germination. This beautiful, efficient process is known as endozookery, and it is a pact between plant and bird, a trade of food for transportation. Other birds, like waxwings in a harsh winter, or finches like the green finch, will also feed on the hips, sometimes tearing them apart to get at the seeds, a less ideal outcome for the rows, but some seeds inevitably get dropped in the process. Small mammals also play their part. A wood mouse will climb nimbly along the thorny canes to nibble at a hip or gather fallen ones from the ground. It might eat the flesh and discard the seed, or it might carry the entire hip away to a hidden cache to store for the winter. If the mouse forgets its cache or is itself caught by a predator, those hidden seeds have a chance to grow. The briar's strategy is one of abundance. It produces so many hundreds of hips that it can afford for some seeds to be crushed or lost. It is playing a numbers game, and it is a game it has mastered. And so, autumn draws to a close. The leaves of the briar turn yellow, russet, and deep crimson, a final brief flourish of color before they fall, carpeting the ground beneath and adding to the rich leaf litter that will feed the soil. The kingdom is preparing for winter. Winter arrives, and the briar patch is transformed again. It is stripped bare, its essential architecture laid stark against the pale winter sky. The soft green canopy is gone, and now we can see the truth of its structure, the dense, chaotic, interlocking web of thorny canes. It looks forbidding, almost menacing, a tangled skeleton. But it is in winter that the briar's role as a fortress and a sanctuary is perhaps at its most critical. The thicket is now a physical barrier against the harshness of the season. It is a formidable windbreak. On a day of bitter winds, the air within the briar patch is significantly calmer and a few degrees warmer than the surrounding land. Snow will pile up on its outer branches, creating an even more insulated, igloo-like structure. For the small birds of the garden and woodland, the wrens, dunnocks, sparrows and finches, the briar patch is a communal roost, a safe, sheltered place to spend the long, cold nights. Huddling together on a branch deep inside the thicket, protected from the wind and hidden from predators like the sparrowhawk, their chances of surviving until dawn are dramatically increased. The larder is not yet empty. A surprising number of deep red hips will cling to the bare branches long into the winter, shriveled and frostbitten, but still edible. For birds like the blackbird or the fieldfare, these hips are a lifeline, a source of emergency sugar and vitamins when the ground is frozen solid and insects are impossible to find. They are the last reserves of the kingdom, offered up to its residents to help them through the hardest times. Life has not vanished. It is simply hidden, waiting. The hedgehog is hibernating deep in its nest of leaves at the base of the thicket, its heartbeat slowed to a mere flicker. Queen bumblebees are sleeping in the soil nearby. Countless insects are overwintering as eggs or pupae tucked into crevices in the bark or among the fallen leaves. The life of the kingdom is dormant, held in trust. The mice and voles are still active, moving through their subnivean tunnels beneath the snow, relying on their stored caches of seeds, including those of the briar. The silence of the winter briar is not an empty silence. It is a silence full of potential. It is the quiet of a city asleep. Within the dormant buds on every cane, the leaves and flowers for next spring are already formed in miniature, perfectly packaged and waiting for the signal of lengthening days and returning warmth. Within the seeds scattered across the landscape by the birds, the potential for new fortresses, new kingdoms, lies sleeping. The briar patch, then, is so much more than one plant. It is a benevolent tyrant, a prickly landlord, a patient provider. It is an apartment building, a supermarket, a fortress, and a nursery, all in one. Its life cycle dictates the life cycles of dozens of other species, from the bee that sips its nectar in May to the blackbird that swallows its fruit in December. It is a hub of constant, intricate interaction, a place where the fates of insect, bird, mammal, and plant are woven together so tightly that they cannot be separated. It stands as a profound testament to the power of a single organism to create a world, to build a community, and to prove that even in the quietest, most overlooked corners of the landscape, life in all its complexity, ferocity, and beauty is always, always finding a way. Chapter 4. A Thorny Alliance. The Briar in human history. And in this complex, ferocious, and beautiful web of life, where everything is finding a way, one particular creature began to watch. A creature that walked on two legs, with hands that could grasp, and a mind that could see, not just what was, but what could be. For thousands of years we, humanity, were just another resident of the Briar's world, another mammal that perhaps sought shelter near its edges, or occasionally tasted its fruit. But then, something shifted. We stopped seeing the Briar merely as a feature of the landscape, and began to see it as a tool, a partner, a collaborator. We began to weave its thorny resilience into the fabric of our own burgeoning civilizations. And in doing so, we forged an alliance that would change the face of the land itself, an alliance built on respect for the Briar's fierce and uncompromising nature. We didn't seek to tame it, not at first. We sought to employ its wildness. Our journey into this alliance begins with one of the most fundamental human needs, the need to draw a line between what is mine and what is yours, between the domestic and the wild, between the grazing flock and the hungry wolf. Before we had stone walls, before we had split rail fences or taut wire, we had the living fence, and the Briar rose, with its dense interlocking growth and its formidable armature of thorns, became one of the first and most trusted materials for this ancient form of architecture. We learned to plant it, to guide it, to persuade it to grow not as a sprawling, chaotic thicket, but as a deliberate and impenetrable line upon the earth, the hedgerow. To call it a simple fence is to misunderstand its genius completely. A wooden fence begins to decay the moment you drive the first post into the ground. A stone wall can be toppled. But a hedgerow, a living wall woven from briar, hawthorn, blackthorn, and hazel, is a self-repairing, ever-growing bastion. It is a boundary that breathes. Imagine the scene, centuries ago, a farmer looking to protect his precious few sheep. He doesn't go to a lumber yard. He goes to the land itself. He digs up young briar saplings, or perhaps takes cuttings, planting them in a long, straight furrow. For the first few years, it is a modest thing, a line of hopeful twigs. But the briar is patient. Its roots grip the soil, its canes reach for the sun, and soon a tangled barrier begins to form. But the real artistry, the true partnership between human and plant, came in the practice of hedge laying. This wasn't simple pruning. It was a form of slow, careful sculpture. In the dormant quiet of winter, when the sap was low and the canes were pliable, a hedger would walk the line with a tool like a billhook, a heavy curved blade. He would not cut the main stems through. Instead, he would slice them partway, near the base, just enough to be able to bend the long, thorny cane down horizontally and weave it between upright stakes driven into the earth. It sounds brutal, a kind of controlled wounding, but it was an act of profound biological understanding. This partial cut, this pleaching, didn't kill the stem, it shocked it. The briar, sensing injury, responded not by dying, but with a surge of life. From the base of the cut, a flush of new, dense, vertical growth would erupt in the spring, while the laid horizontal stem would also sprout new shoots along its length. The result was a structure of incredible strength and density, a lattice of living wood, thicker and more impassable at the base than any simple bush could be. It was a perfect livestock fence. A cow would press against it, feel the sharp prick of 1,000 thorns, and learn its lesson. A sheep, prone to finding the smallest gap, would be met with an interlocking web of woody stems too dense to push through. And unlike a dead fence, which offers no sustenance, the hedgerow was a larder. It was a pharmacy. It was a vibrant corridor for life, a biological highway running through the managed landscape. While the farmers' fields were a monoculture of wheat or barley, the hedgerow remained a ribbon of wildness, a refuge for the very birds and insects that had always called the Briar home. It was a compromise, a bargain struck between our need for order and nature's insistence on complexity. We literally redrew the maps of nations with these living fences. In places like Great Britain during the Enclosure Acts, vast tracts of common land were divided into the familiar patchwork of fields we see today, all marked out by these thorny living lines. They became property boundaries, parish boundaries, the physical manifestation of law and ownership written in the language of plants. And as they grew, they became records of time. A hedgerow could be dated by the species found within it. A rough rule of thumb, known as Hooper's rule, suggested you could count the number of woody species in a 30-meter stretch and multiply by 100 to get a rough estimate of the hedge's age in years. A hedge with briar, hawthorn and maple might be 300 years old. One with 10 species could be a remnant of an ancient woodland, a 1,000-year-old living artifact, still marking a boundary set by forgotten hands. It is a humbling thought that the quiet, thorny line at the edge of a field could be older than the stone church in the village nearby, a silent, living witness to centuries of human history, its roots deep in the soil of the past. But this alliance was not just about control and containment. It was also about sustenance and healing. As our ancestors lived and worked alongside these thorny barriers, they learned to read the briar's other secrets, the ones it held not in its thorns but in its flowers, and most importantly, in its fruit. Long after the delicate pink and white petals of summer had fallen, after the leaves had turned to gold and rust and dropped to the ground, the briar offered one final brilliant gift to the darkening year, the rosehip. These small scarlet jewels, clinging to the bare skeletal canes, were a beacon of life in the fading light of autumn. And our ancestors knew, with an empirical wisdom passed down through generations, that these fruits held a potent magic against the hardships of winter. They were not just food, they were medicine. The practice of gathering rosehips was a ritual timed by the seasons. You waited until after the first hard frost. The cold shock caused the cells within the hip to change, softening the flesh, and it was said, concentrating its sweetness and its virtue. Imagine a woman in the crisp, cold air of a late November morning, her breath misting before her. She wears thick gloves, not against the cold but against the ever-present thorns. Her basket is lined with cloth. She moves along the hedgerow, her eyes scanning for the brightest, firmest hips. Each one is plucked with care, a tiny, precious globe of stored summer sunlight. The hips themselves are a fascinating piece of natural engineering. What we call the fruit is not a true fruit in the botanical sense, like a berry. It is an accessory fruit. The scarlet flesh is actually the swollen hypanthium, the base of the flower, which has grown up and around the plant's actual fruits, the hard seed-like achenes, nestled inside, surrounded by a bed of fine, irritating hairs. Our ancestors knew about these hairs. They knew that if you ate the hip whole, the hairs would cause an intense itching in the digestive tract. The Latin name for the common dog rose, Rosa canina, was once thought to refer to the shape of its thorns, like a dog's tooth, but another theory suggests it was because the plant was used in ancient times to treat the bite of a rabid dog. A more practical, and perhaps more irritating, association comes from the use of those tiny hairs inside the hip by mischievous children for centuries as a key ingredient in itching powder. But prepared correctly, the rosehip was a powerhouse. The process of turning these hard, seedy pods into medicine was one of patient, domestic alchemy. Back in a quiet cottage, with the smell of wood smoke in the air, the hips would be topped and tailed, then boiled gently in water until they were soft and pulpy. This mash would then be painstakingly pushed through a fine sieve or a muslin cloth, a process that had to be done 2 or 3 times to ensure that every single one of those irritating hairs was removed. The resulting liquid, a beautiful opaque sunset orange puree, was the prize. Sweetened with honey or sugar, it became rosehip syrup, a staple of the folk pharmacy. What our ancestors knew through observation, we now know through biochemistry. Rose hips are one of the most concentrated natural sources of vitamin C on the planet. A single 100 grams of fresh rose hips can contain over 400 milligrams of ascorbic acid, a concentration that dwarfs that of an orange or a lemon. In a time before global trade, when fresh fruit was impossible to find in the depths of winter, this was nothing short of a miracle. Vitamin C is essential for the function of our immune system, for the repair of tissues, for the prevention of the dreaded disease of scurvy, which plagued communities deprived of fresh produce. That spoonful of sweet tangy syrup was a shield against winter's illnesses, a way to bolster the body's defences using a gift from the hedgerow. During World War II in Britain, when citrus imports were cut off by blockades, the government organised a national effort, sending volunteers and schoolchildren out to harvest wild rose hips from the country's hedgerows. This ancient folk remedy became a matter of national public health, a sweet wild medicine that kept a nation healthy through its darkest hour. The plant offered more than just its hips. The petals, gathered on a dry day in early summer, were infused in water to create rose water, a gentle antiseptic and a soothing lotion for tired eyes or irritated skin. The leaves were dried to make a tea, believed to be a mild astringent and a tonic for the blood. Even the roots were sometimes dug up and decocted, used in older, more obscure remedies. The briar was a complete apothecary, growing freely at the edge of the field, offering up its solutions to those who knew how to look and how to ask. It was a relationship of reciprocity. We gave the briar a place to grow, a line to follow, and in return it gave us boundaries, beauty, and health. It was a partnership that served the body as well as the land, and of course it also served the palate. The line between food and medicine has always been a blurry one, and the gifts of the briar found their way into the kitchen just as often as the medicine chest. The same ruby-red syrup that fought off coughs and colds could be drizzled over a morning bowl of porridge or a simple pudding, its bright, tangy flavour a welcome counterpoint to the starchy staples of an older diet. The tart pulp, carefully separated from its seeds and hairs, could be cooked down with sugar to make a thick, glistening jelly or jam, a way to preserve that vibrant, fruity taste and spread it on bread in the dead of February, a memory of sunshine on a grey day. The petals, too, moved from the apothecary to the confectioner's table. Their delicate, almost ethereal fragrance was captured through distillation, a process that feels like pure magic. Petals were steeped in water, and the steam, laden with a complex cocktail of volatile oils like geraniol and citronellol, was collected and cooled, condensing back into a liquid that was the very essence of the flower, rose water. For centuries, this liquid has been a cornerstone of cuisines across the Middle East, Persia, and South Asia. It is the flavor of celebration, of romance. It is the subtle, floral note in the sweet, sticky layers of baklava, the fragrant soul of a creamy rice pudding, the surprising, perfumed delight in a cube of Turkish delight, or lokum. It is a flavor that is both gentle and profound, capable of transforming a simple dish into something extraordinary. Even a simple infusion of fresh petals into sugar or honey creates a condiment that feels impossibly luxurious. You can imagine a medieval cook wanting to create a special sweetmeat for a feast, carefully layering fresh briar rose petals with sugar in a clay pot and leaving it in a cool, dark place for weeks. The sugar, a hygroscopic crystal, would draw out the moisture and the essential oils from the petals, becoming imbued with their scent and flavor, while the petals themselves became candied and translucent. It was a simple technology, but one that allowed for the preservation of the most fleeting of things, the scent of a flower in June. This culinary history reveals the dual nature of our relationship with the briar. On one hand, in the form of the hip, it was a practical, vital source of nutrition, a tool for survival. It was earthy, tart, and fundamentally wholesome. On the other hand, in the form of the petal, it was a symbol of beauty, luxury, and refinement. It was ethereal, fragrant, and a tool for pleasure. This single plant provided for both our most basic needs and our most elevated desires. It could be the humble, nourishing syrup in a peasant's cottage and the exotic, perfumed flavoring in a sultan's palace. It was, and is, a plant of profound versatility, a testament to the endless generosity of the wild. And yet, perhaps the most profound and surprising chapter in this thorny alliance is the one that is least visible. It is a secret partnership, hidden from view, buried in the soil of gardens all around the world. It is the story of how the wild, rugged, indomitable Briar became the silent, unseen hero behind the world's most beloved and celebrated flower. For all our adoration of the modern garden rose, the hybrid teas with their perfect spiral buds, the floribundas with their extravagant clusters of blooms, the English roses with their packed quartered petals and intoxicating scents, very few of them are standing on their own 2 feet, or rather, on their own roots. Many of these spectacular cultivars, bred over centuries for the color, size and scent of their flowers, have paid a price for their beauty. In selecting for these aesthetic traits, we have often inadvertently bred out the very qualities that make the wild briar so successful: its vigor, its disease resistance, its tolerance for poor soils, its sheer stubborn will to live. A modern, prize-winning rose, if grown on its own roots, can be a fragile, demanding thing, susceptible to fungal diseases like black spot and rust, and intolerant of difficult conditions. It is a thoroughbred, beautiful but delicate. And so for well over a century, rose growers have relied on an ingenious horticultural technique that forms a living bridge between the wild and the cultivated: grafting. The concept is simple and brilliant. You take the wild, tough, common briar, very often our old friend Rosa canina or a similar vigorous species, and you grow it as a strong, healthy root system. This is the rootstock. Then you take a small bud or a piece of stem from the fancy, delicate, beautiful rose you wish to propagate. This is the scion. In a procedure that is a kind of careful plant surgery, a small incision is made in the stem of the rootstock, and the bud of the scion is slipped inside, positioned so that the cambium layers of both plants, the thin green layer of active growth just under the bark, are in direct contact. The union is then wrapped tightly with raffia or special tape to hold it in place and protect it from drying out. And then, a small miracle of biology occurs. If the graft is successful, the two genetically distinct plants do not reject each other. Instead, their tissues fuse. The cells of the cambium layers begin to grow together, knitting themselves into a single, unified vascular system. The wild, powerful roots of the briar continue to draw water and nutrients from the soil, but now, instead of feeding a thorny briar cane, they pump that life-giving sap up into the tissues of the grafted scion. The scion, in turn, accepts this sustenance and grows, producing the leaves, stems, and magnificent flowers of its own variety. It is a perfect chimera, a single plant made of two individuals. One provides the strength, the resilience, the unshakable foundation. The other provides the beauty, the color, the celebrated bloom. Every time you walk through a formal rose garden and admire a perfect crimson Mr. Lincoln or a fragrant apricot-colored Abraham Darby, you are almost certainly looking at the result of this hidden alliance. If you were to brush away the soil at the base of that elegant plant, you would likely find a thick woody knob, the bud union, the scar tissue marking the point where the cultivated rose was joined to its wild ancestor. Below that point, it is all humble, powerful briar. Above that point, it is all celebrated beauty. The briar is the invisible engine driving the glorious machine. It is the hard-working foundation that allows the magnificent palace to stand. This practice tells us something profound about our relationship with nature. It acknowledges a fundamental truth. We cannot entirely escape the wild. We can select for beauty. We can hybridize for fragrance. We can create flowers of a shape and color that nature never would have produced on its own. But to keep those creations alive and thriving, we must often go back to the source, back to the thorny, untamed original. We must borrow its strength, its resilience, its ancient wisdom encoded in its DNA. The wild briar underpins our most manicured gardens. It is the secret of their success, the quiet, rugged soul that gives them the power to grow. From the living fence that marked the dawn of agriculture, to the vitamin-rich syrup that healed our bodies, to the fragrant water that graced our tables, and finally, to the very roots that support our most cherished flowers, the briar rose has been our constant thorny companion. It is a story not of domination, but of partnership. We learn to use its thorns for our protection, its fruits for our health, its petals for our pleasure, and its roots for its strength. In every chapter of this long and complex history, we have succeeded most not when we have tried to conquer the briar's wildness, but when we have found clever and respectful ways to harness it. It stands as a powerful reminder that our own strength and resilience as a species has always been linked to our ability to understand and collaborate with the intricate, powerful, and endlessly inventive world that surrounds us. The fortress of Sleeping Beauty was not a prison to be overcome. It was a symbol of a power that, when understood, could be an ally of incomparable worth. Chapter 5: The Symbolism of Duality. Beauty and pain in art and culture. And so we see it, don't we? This plant, this wild and sprawling briar, is not something to be conquered, but an ally of incomparable worth. But its alliance with us extends far beyond the tangible gifts of its hips or the formidable structure of its hedgerows. It has offered us something far more profound, something that has shaped the very way we tell our stories, understand our hearts, and codify our beliefs. We have collaborated with the briar rose not only with our hands but with our minds. We looked at this living paradox, this creation of breathtaking, fragrant beauty, armed with wounding, vicious thorns, and we saw ourselves, we saw our world. We saw the intricate, often painful duality of existence itself, and we chose the rose to be its ambassador. This journey, from a physical plant to a deep and resonant symbol, is not an act of simple invention. We did not just assign meaning to the rose arbitrarily. Rather, we listened to what it was already telling us. We observed, we felt the sharp prick of a thorn while reaching for a perfect blossom, and we understood. The plant's very nature became a language, a physical vocabulary for the most complex and contradictory of human emotions. The briar rose didn't just become a symbol, it was one, long before we had the words for it. It was a living, breathing metaphor, patiently waiting for us to learn how to read it. Let us travel back, just for a moment, to a time of stone columns and whispered conversations, to the ancient world of Greece and Rome. Here the rose was already a powerful presence, tied inextricably to the gods of love and beauty. It was said to have sprung from the spilled blood of Adonis, the mortal lover of Aphrodite, or in other tales, from the sea foam that birthed the goddess herself. From its very mythological origins, it was born of passion and of sorrow. It was beautiful, but it was stained with loss. The Romans, inheriting this reverence, wove the rose deep into their culture of intimacy and power. And it is here we find one of its most enduring and quiet legacies, the concept of sub rosa, meaning under the rose. Imagine a banquet hall in ancient Rome. The air is thick with the scent of wine and roasted meats, voices are low, and matters of state, or perhaps matters of the heart, are being discussed. Hanging from the ceiling, directly above the table, is a freshly cut wild rose, or perhaps a garland of them. This was not mere decoration. This was a signal, a contract of silence understood by everyone present. Anything said beneath that rose was bound by an oath of secrecy. To speak of it outside this room would be a grave betrayal. The rose, with its intoxicating beauty, represented the allure of the secret knowledge being shared, but its thorns were the silent, ever-present warning. This knowledge is protected. To betray this confidence is to risk being wounded. It is such a simple, elegant piece of communication. A single flower transforms a space, turning it into a sanctuary of trust. It's a form of engineering, but for social dynamics, using a plant as the primary component. The tradition lingered for centuries. Roses were carved into the ceilings of Catholic confessionals, a permanent reminder that the words spoken there were held in sacred, protected confidence. The flower became a quiet guardian of our most vulnerable truths. And as the Roman world gave way to the burgeoning Christian faith, the rose did not fade into obscurity. Instead, it was adopted and transformed, its wild duality perfectly suited to the new stories of sacrifice, redemption, and divine love. The early church fathers saw in the rose a reflection of their deepest theology. The wild rose, with its 5 simple open petals, became a symbol of the 5 wounds of Christ on the cross. The flower's very anatomy was seen as a divine map of the central event of their faith. Its beauty was a sign of the divine, and its thorns a reminder of the earthly suffering required for that divinity to be revealed. The crown of thorns itself, believed to have been woven from a thorny plant, forever linked the idea of pain and kingship, of suffering and salvation. The color of the rose took on profound meaning. The red rose, already associated with the blood of Adonis, became the blood of the Christian martyrs. A single red rose blooming was seen as a symbol of a soul who had given their life for their faith, a spot of divine beauty growing from the soil of ultimate sacrifice. The white rose, in contrast, became a symbol of purity, of light, of innocence. It was the flower of the Virgin Mary, who was often called the rose without a thorn, representing a state of perfect purity, a beauty that existed without the wound of original sin. In this new garden of faith, the rose could represent both the suffering of the body and the purity of the soul. It contained the entire human and divine drama within its single, fragile form. This spiritual collaboration with the rose became something tangible, something you could hold in your hand. Consider the rosary. The very word comes from rosarium, the Latin for rose garden. The string of beads was conceived as a portable garden, a way for the faithful to walk through the sacred stories, the mysteries of their faith, through touch and repetition. Each bead is a step, a prayer, a meditation. Holding a rosary is like holding a condensed symbolic garden, with each prayer a metaphorical rose offered up. It is an act of profound connection, transforming a botanical symbol into a tool for contemplation, a physical anchor for a spiritual journey. It is a testament to our deep need to make the abstract feel real, to touch our beliefs, and what better object to choose than one inspired by a flower that already felt like a prayer made manifest. But the human story is never just about faith. It is also about power, conflict, and the claiming of land and title. And here too, the Briar rose, in all its stark duality, became a central player. It moved from the quiet confessional and the contemplative garden onto the bloody battlefields of 15th century England. We call this conflict the Wars of the Roses, and that name is not just a poetic flourish added by later historians. The rose was the living, breathing brand of the 2 rival houses vying for the throne. The House of Lancaster, represented by the red rose, Rosa Gallica officinalis, and the House of York, represented by the white rose, Rosa alba. Imagine it. These were not just abstract flags. They were symbols plucked directly from the English countryside, from the very hedgerows and gardens these men were fighting to control. Soldiers wore badges of red or white roses on their helmets. Banners embroidered with the flower fluttered in the smoke-filled air. It was a symbol of allegiance, a declaration of identity. To wear the rose was to choose a side, to pledge your life to a cause represented by a simple flower. And in this context, the rose's duality took on a new, brutal meaning. The beauty of the flower was the righteous glory of your cause, the divine right of your king. The thorns were the weapons in your hand, the violence you were willing to inflict upon the wearers of the other color. The rose, that ancient symbol of love and secrecy, became a justification for war. It is a sobering reminder of how we can take nature's most beautiful creations and press them into the service of our most violent impulses. Yet the story doesn't end in division. After decades of conflict, the houses were united through marriage, and a new dynasty, the Tudors, came to power. They needed a symbol, a powerful piece of marketing, to signify that the war was over and that England was whole again, and so they engineered a new flower, a botanical impossibility that could exist only in art and imagination, the Tudor rose. It combined the red outer petals of the Lancastrian rose with the white inner petals of the Yorkist rose. It was a masterpiece of political branding. This new composite flower was carved into cathedrals, stamped onto coins, and woven into tapestries. It was a constant, visible promise of unity and peace. The two warring roses were now held in a permanent, harmonious embrace. It was humanity using the language of the rose to write its own future, to declare an end to the conflict its duality had once represented. The briar's nature as both beautiful and dangerous was resolved, at least symbolically, into a new unified whole. From the grand stage of war and politics, the rose's symbolism also trickles down into the most intimate spaces of our personal lives, into our art, our poetry, and our stories. When a poet wants to speak of love, what do they reach for? When an artist wants to capture the fleeting nature of beauty, what do they paint? Time and time again, it is the rose. "Oh, my love is like a red rose," writes Robert Burns, and we understand instantly. He doesn't need to explain. The image conveys it all. The vibrant color of passion, the soft perfection of the beloved, and the unspoken knowledge that this beauty is delicate, temporary, and must be handled with care, lest you be pricked by the thorns of heartbreak or loss. In classical still life paintings, the Vanitas tradition, you will often see a perfect rose in full bloom placed next to a skull, or a watch, or a wilting flower. The message is clear and profound. This perfect beauty, this moment of fragrant life, is temporary. The thorns represent the pain of this knowledge, the difficulty of accepting that all things must fade. The rose becomes a meditation on time itself, a beautiful, poignant reminder to cherish the present moment, for it is as fleeting as a petal on the wind. And this brings us at last back to our Briar fortress, back to the story of sleeping beauty. For here, in this beloved fairy tale, the symbolism of the briar rose reaches its magnificent zenith. The story is a deep psychological map of the human heart, and the briar is its key. The princess, pricked by a spindle, falls into a deep sleep, a kind of living death, and around the castle, a great impenetrable hedge of briar roses grows up, sealing her away from the world. What is this fortress of thorns? Really, it is not just a plot device. It is a perfect metaphor. It is the protective wall we build around a deep wound. It is the scar tissue of grief. It is the defensive barrier of a heart that has been hurt and is now in a state of suspended animation, waiting. The thorns represent the danger of getting close, the pain that must be navigated to reach the vulnerable beauty sleeping within. For 100 years, the briar hedge does its job perfectly. It is a fortress of no. It repels all who are not ready, all who approach with brute force or impure intentions. The story tells of princes who try to hack their way through, only to be caught and killed by the thorns. The briar, in this sense, is a gatekeeper. It is a test. And then, the right time comes. The right person arrives. The prince who is destined to break the spell does not conquer the briar. He collaborates with it. The story tells us that as he approached, the great hedge of thorns burst into bloom with beautiful roses and parted for him, allowing him to pass through unharmed. This is the crucial detail. The briar does not yield to violence. It yields to destiny, to timing, to a love that is true. The thorns transform into flowers. The pain gives way to beauty. The barrier becomes a welcoming path. The briar rose in this story is the ultimate symbol of protected beauty. It tells us that the most precious things are often the most fiercely guarded. It teaches us that wounds require time to heal, and that the process of healing must be respected. The fortress of thorns is not evil. It is necessary. It is nature's own patient, formidable process of recovery, made visible, and the final bloom is the promise of renewal, the assurance that even after the deepest sleep, after the most painful wound, a waking is possible. Love and beauty can flourish once more. From a secret shared under a single flower in Rome, to the prayers counted on a string of beads, from the bloody fields of England to the enchanted castle of a sleeping princess, the briar rose has been our constant companion. It has offered us its own body as a canvas upon which to paint our most complex ideas. Its scent, its color, its softness, and its sharpness have given us a language to speak of love, faith, conflict, and time. It holds our stories in its very structure. It is a quiet, thorny, and beautiful historian, reminding us that our inner worlds and the outer world of nature are not separate at all. They are, and have always been, deeply, profoundly, and inextricably intertwined. Chapter 6: The 100-Year Siege, Nature's Reclamation of the Castle. And what happens when one of those worlds, our world of stone and story, is left entirely to the other? What happens when our most profound and permanent structures, the castles we build to defy time, are left to the quiet, thorny historian whose sense of time operates on a scale we can barely comprehend? The fairy tale tells us of a 100-year slumber, a magical stasis. But nature knows no stasis. It knows only process. It knows only growth and decay and transformation. And so, the story of the Briar Rose and the Sleeping Castle is not one of magic, but of a slow, beautiful, and inexorable siege. A siege not of armies and catapults, but of seeds and roots and time. Let us watch this siege unfold. Let us settle in, find our comfortable place in the darkness, and become silent observers to a century of profound change. The moment the last gate is barred, the last human footstep echoes away into silence, the clock of the forest begins to tick. In the first year, the change is almost imperceptible. The castle stands as it always has, sharp-edged against the sky, a monument of human will. But the wind, that tireless messenger, is already at work. It carries not just dust, but microscopic life. Spores of moss and lichen, lighter than thought, settle into the porous surfaces of the stone. They are the true pioneers, the first settlers in this new and barren land. On the shaded, damp, north-facing walls, a faint green blush begins to appear, a living patina that looks at first like a mere stain. These are the mosses, ancient and simple, requiring almost nothing but a foothold and a little moisture. Each tiny moss plant, a miniature forest in itself, acts as a sponge. It holds a droplet of dew a little longer, traps a grain of wind-blown dust. It is the beginning of soil. At the same time, birds, unaware that the castle is now a place of slumber, continue their daily routines. A robin, having feasted on the bright red hips of a wild rose in the forest beyond, perches on the crenellations of a high tower, and in its droppings, nestled within a small parcel of natural fertilizer, are the seeds of Rosa arvensis, the field rose, or perhaps Rosa canina, the dog rose. Tough, hardy, patient seeds, encased in a wooden shell that requires the hardship of a cold winter, or even two, to break its dormancy. This process, called stratification, is nature's way of ensuring a seed doesn't sprout at the wrong time. It must first experience the deep cold, a quiet period of waiting in the dark, before it is ready for the sun. And so the seeds wait. They are washed by the rain into the fine cracks between the great stones where the lime mortar, centuries old, has begun to crumble just a little. Here, in these tiny crevices, the work of the mosses has already begun. They have trapped a thimbleful of dust and moisture. It is not much, but for a rose, it is enough. By year 5, the first true victories of the siege are won. That faint green blush on the north wall is now a thick, velvety carpet of moss. Walking on the ramparts, you would feel a softness underfoot where once there was only hard, unforgiving stone. In the cracks of the courtyard flagstones, where generations of boots and cartwheels had kept life at bay, tiny green shoots are pushing their way into the light. Dandelions, their seeds carried on feathery parachutes, thistles prickly and determined, and here and there a different kind of shoot, a tougher, woodier stem armed with tiny, sharp thorns emerging from a crack in the castle wall, 10 feet above the ground. This is our briar. Its first act is not to bloom, but to explore. One tender, questing shoot, called a cane, grows upwards seeking light. It is a marvel of engineering. It is not strong enough to support itself, so it leans against the cold stone of the castle. As it grows, its thorns, those beautiful and functional daggers, are not merely defensive, they are grappling hooks. Pointed slightly backwards, they catch on the slightest imperfection in the stone, allowing the cane to hoist itself upwards, inch by inch. It is a slow, silent act of mountaineering. Down below, hidden from sight, the real work is being done. The root system, born from that single seed, is performing a kind of patient, methodical demolition. A plant root may seem soft, but its tip is a powerful and sensitive probe. As it grows, it exerts a slow hydraulic pressure that is immense. And it is not just a physical force. The very tip of the rootlet releases mild carbonic acids, the same gentle acids you find in a fizzy drink. These acids are a form of chemical warfare on a microscopic scale. The lime mortar that holds the castle stones together is alkaline. The root's acid secretions begin to dissolve it, molecule by molecule, turning solid mineral into soluble nutrients the plant can absorb. The root doesn't just push through the crack, it actively eats its way through the castle's foundations. It is a locksmith and a miner, all in one. By year 15, the castle is no longer pristine. It has begun to soften at the edges. Several rose bushes have now established themselves at the base of the walls, their roots delving deep into the foundations. From these established plants, great arching canes, some 20 feet long, are thrown up against the walls. They have reached the lower windows now, their thorny branches scratching against the leaded glass in the wind, a sound like a faint, persistent whisper. The courtyard is no longer a paved square, but a chaotic meadow, a tapestry of wild flowers and tough grasses buzzing with insects. And another player has entered the field. Ivy, Hydera helix. Its seeds, also carried by birds, have found purchase. Where the rose is a scrambler, using thorns to gain purchase, the ivy is a true climber. It has a more specialized tool. Along its growing stems, it sprouts tiny, hairy, aerial rootlets. These rootlets secrete a powerful bioadhesive, a cement that binds the ivy to the stone with incredible force. The ivy vines spread like a green stain, mapping the contours of the walls, flowing into every crevice, covering the carved gargoyles and coats of arms, slowly erasing the symbols of human power with a quiet living glyph. The rose and the ivy are not competitors, but collaborators in this siege. The rose with its powerful roots opens the cracks. The ivy with its dense mat of leaves traps moisture against the walls, accelerating the growth of moss and the slow decay of the mortar. Water, once the castle's friend, collected in cisterns and channeled by lead pipes, is now its greatest enemy. Every crevice opened by a root, every patch of moss that holds moisture, becomes a conduit for water. In the winter, this water freezes, and as water freezes into ice, it expands with a force that can shatter granite. This process, frost wedging, happens year after year. A microscopic crack, widened by a root, is filled with water. The winter freeze pushes it a fraction of a millimeter wider. The next year, it holds a little more water, and the ice pushes it wider still. It is a slow, silent, and unstoppable jackhammer, working relentlessly through every winter of the long slumber. By year 30, the transformation is profound. The original rose bushes have become immense, tangled mounds of thorny wood at the base of the walls, a truly impenetrable thicket from which new canes launch their assault on the ramparts. On the tops of the walls and in the turrets, where decades of falling leaves from the roses and ivy have been trapped, a new and remarkable process is underway. The leaves decay. Worms, beetles, and a universe of microscopic fungi and bacteria are breaking them down. This decomposition is creating soil. Where once there was only stone, there is now a thin, dark, rich layer of humus, inches deep. And where there is soil, life follows. Seeds of other plants, unable to germinate on bare stone, now find a welcoming nursery. Ferns uncurl their delicate fronds in the shaded corners. Foxgloves raise their spires of purple bells, and most significantly, the seeds of trees. A sycamore seed, a helicopter spinning on the wind, lands in the soil that has collected in a collapsed section of a turret. A birch seed, tiny and light as dust, finds its way to a ledge. An acorn, perhaps forgotten by a jay, is pressed into the new earth of the courtyard. The arrival of trees marks a new phase of the siege. A rose root is a powerful thing, but the root of an oak or an ash is an order of magnitude more powerful. These roots are not just probing for weakness, they are creating it. As a tree grows, its roots thicken, year by year, in concentric rings, just like its trunk. A root that finds its way into a fissure in the foundation will, over a decade, thicken from the size of a pencil to the size of a wrist, and then to the size of an arm, exerting a quiet, continuous, and irresistible pressure. This is how nature splits mountains. A castle wall is a simple matter. We arrive at the half-century mark, 50 years, a human lifetime. The castle is now more green than grey. From a distance, it might look like a peculiar angular hill. The sharp lines of its architecture are blurred, softened by a mantle of green. The great wooden doors of the gatehouse rotted through decades ago, and the entrance is now choked with a thorny curtain of briar. To enter, you would need not a key, an axe. The ecosystem is now complex and multi-layered. The roses and ivy have formed a dense outer shell, a mesopredator exclusion zone, as an ecologist might call it. It's a thorny fortress that keeps larger animals like deer from grazing on the tender young trees growing within the walls. The castle has become a sanctuary. The once manicured courtyard is now a young woodland. Sunlight dapples through the leaves of ash and sycamore onto a forest floor of moss and ferns. The sounds have changed completely. The silence is no longer empty. It is filled with the intricate symphony of the wild, the hum of bees in the rose blossoms on a summer afternoon, the frantic chirping of house sparrows who have found that a suit of armor in a forgotten hall makes a wonderfully secure place for a nest, the sharp percussive tap of a woodpecker searching for insects in the decaying window frames. At night, the hoot of a tawny owl from the highest tower, its voice echoing through the empty halls, and the rustle of mice and voles in the great tapestries that have crumbled into piles of thread and dust on the floor. A vixen has found the old wine cellars make a perfect dry den for her cubs. A badger, a powerful digger, has expanded a collapsed section of the rampart into a sprawling set. The human fortress, designed to protect a single species from all others, has become a fortress for all species. By year 80, the forces of gravity, aided by the tireless work of the roots, begin to claim major victories. A section of the southern wall, its foundations slowly pushed apart by the roots of a great ash tree, and its mortar washed away by decades of channeled rainwater, finally gives way. It collapses not with a great roar, but with a slow grinding groan, a cascade of stone and ivy into the old moat. This is not destruction, it is creation. The rubble pile becomes a new habitat, a sun-drenched, south-facing slope perfect for lizards and snakes to bask on. Its deep crevices become homes for weasels and stoats. The breach in the wall becomes a highway for animals to move in and out of the castle's sheltered interior. The very structure of the building is now a vertical landscape. The walls are cliffs with their own unique flora. The ledges are home to colonies of ferns. The deep window embrasures filled with soil are like high-altitude meadows. A kestrel, a small falcon, now nests on a ledge that was once a watchman's perch, hovering on the wind over the castle grounds, which have themselves become a wild hunting territory. We reach the end of our vigil. 100 years have passed. The castle of the fairy tale is gone. In its place stands something far more complex, more resilient, and arguably more beautiful. It is a living monument. The Briar rose is no longer just climbing the walls, it is the walls. A tangled, woody, thorny mass, dozens of feet thick, forms the castle's outer defense. In the summer, it is a cloud of pale pink and white blossoms, a soft, fragrant deception hiding a structure of formidable strength. Within this thorny perimeter, a young, vigorous forest has grown. The tops of ash, birch, and even a few young oak trees now rise above the broken towers. The forest canopy has shaded out some of the roses that first colonized the interior. a classic stage of ecological succession. The pioneers create the conditions for their own replacements. The stone is still there, but you must look for it. An archway, perfectly framed by ivy, leads from one forest glade to another. A spiral staircase in a tower, its central column now encased in the trunk of a sycamore, wins its way up to a roof of leaves. The great hall, its own roof long since collapsed, is a sunken, shaded glade, eternally cool and damp, where mosses grow thick as fleece and rare fungi emerge from the decaying floorboards. The 100-year siege is over. Nature has won. But it was never a war. It was simply a reclamation, a patient, persistent and quiet assertion of life's fundamental principle, that all things are temporary, that all structures eventually become part of the soil, and that life will always find a way to take root in the ruins. The fairy tale speaks of a prince fighting his way through the thorns to break the spell. But as we look at this castle, this vibrant, thriving and utterly wild ecosystem, we have to wonder, perhaps the spell was not the slumber, but the castle itself, a spell of human dominance, of straight lines and sterile stone. And perhaps the Briar rose was not the curse, but the cure, the slow, thorny and beautiful magic that allowed the world to heal, to erase our story for a time and replace it with its own, a story written in bark and blossom, in root and stone, a story of how even the strongest fortress we can build is, in the end, just a temporary vessel, waiting patiently to be filled once again with the wilderness that surrounds us all.